Well, welcome everybody. Today is Wednesday, June 29th, and this is the webinar that we have entitled Removing a Straw from the Camel's Back. I'm Catherine Boyle. I'm the Mental Health Ministry Director for Key Ministry, and we're glad that you could join us today. There's a few folks that are joining now live on the webinar. For those of you who are watching on the Facebook live stream, you are absolutely part of this. So I look forward to, hang on, I have to grab my phone. I'm doing this solo today. So I look forward to seeing your comments and questions that you put either in the chat in the webinar, or feel free to do that in the Facebook live stream as well. I will be, like I said, I am solo today. Beth had another obligation, so it might take me a little time to jump back and forth between, but just bear with me because we do want to work in whatever questions or comments or things that you've experienced that have been great examples of how churches and individuals can come alongside someone and help remove a straw or prevent a stressor in their lives. So if you missed this, several weeks ago, we had a podcast episode on June 16th when we talked about this very concept. And it springs from that adage, oh, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. It's just that one more thing that, that was a catalyst for disaster in somebody's life of some kind. It could be anything. I mean, we can be talking about, any kind of, struggle, whether it's a mental health struggle or anything else. But what happens if we can actually come alongside somebody who is struggling and actually take off a burden? I believe very strongly that the opposite can happen as well, that, a person can gain renewed strength. One of the things that I actually mentioned in the blog article that went along with the podcast, you may have either read it or heard it, is that there's ample research that shows if you have a lot of clutter around you, that can really weigh on you mentally and prevent you from being able to perhaps accomplish everything that you need or want to do. But by just that simple act of tidying up a little bit, it can free you mentally from having to focus on so many different things. So it's that kind of concept that we're talking about here. Removing that one item of mental clutter that somebody has in their life to try to help them have that more clarity and strength for what they need to deal with. Well, I put together just a small thing to guide the webinar today. So I'm going to do a screen share real quick and grab that presentation. Let's see, where am I? Okay. So in the podcast and in the in the transcript, we didn't really talk about principles so much. I did ask a few ministry friends, what were some examples of things that have been done for them that were really helpful. And so I shared some of those, but they had just so many great examples that I really felt like it was something that we needed to share in an additional way or a bigger way. And, I was reading through their responses, and there were really several principles that emerged as, as themes, if you will, or principles as I was looking through their responses. Now, we talk often about how mental health ministry is not so much about, oh, I got to hire a new staff person, I got to have, this whole new set of programs. No, it has nothing. It can have something to do with that, but primarily it's about approach. How are you coming alongside someone to help them really with what may be some of the hardest things that they have to deal with? And they're difficult primarily because people often don't want to talk about mental health challenges. But some of the principles that emerged as we were talking with some ministry friends is that, the first thing that churches and individuals who were part of a faith community were doing was they were building relationship with people who, who were like that camel that had many things. You know, ministry overall is not about problems to be solved, but it's about people to be loved. It's about, in particular, with mental health kinds of needs, it's about going after somebody who may be a lost sheep and really needs to see that there is somebody that just cares, in the name of Jesus, that they just care. And so, you know, don't think programming, don't think has to happen in the four walls of the church, but we just encourage you to think about, leaning into a relationship and deepening a relationship with somebody who may have some struggles. Another thing that really emerged was, people following the golden rule and the platinum rule. I think if you are churched at all, you probably are familiar with the golden rule, which is, treat others basically the way that you want to be treated. And everybody can do that, right? How you want to be treated. That's pretty basic, pretty easy. But the platinum rule kind of takes it up to another level. And you need to have relationship to be able to pursue and implement platinum rule kind of thinking. But it's really leaning into relationships so that you understand another person's needs. It really is, comforting others with the comfort that you have received. And so I have a great example of that happened to me personally. And it happened from a pet supply company. I have a cat. I've always had cats. I love them. I'm sorry if you're dog people. But one of my cats, my beloved cat for many years, died unexpectedly a few years ago. And I had just bought some flea treatment for this cat because he went outside. And so I contacted Chewy and asked them if, I could send it back or, whatever, and explained. And they were very compassionate in the communication. Well, a few days later, they told me, don't worry about it. We'll refund you and, donate it to a local pet shelter. And a few days later, they sent me flowers. Now, I was just blown away by this because, this was so far above and beyond anything that was really necessary. But that's a beautiful example of the platinum rule, of leaning in to understand, where a person is and helping come alongside and meet their needs. It is absolutely 2 Corinthians 1, verses 3 through 7 in action. And if you're not familiar, I encourage you to look that up. It's 2 Corinthians 1, verses 3 through 7. And it says basically that we are to comfort others with the comfort we've received. So when you've lost a pet, you know how that feels. So that's what Chewy did. If you are a person who, has struggled with depression and anxiety, you are the perfect person to, speak life into somebody who is struggling with depression and anxiety. So, God often calls us into things by providing us everything that we need to get started, whether you may know it or not. And he often uses our personal gifts and our passion to provide, not only to provide for ourselves, but also to lean into relationship with others and help come alongside, and provide support to them. So, just a couple of things that come to mind. Well, do you love to cook? Are you, and do you care about people who are, currently homeless? Well, gosh, maybe you can work with a homeless ministry and help, provide meals. Do you love to build things, repair cars, that sort of thing? Well, gosh, there's people always need car repair. That can absolutely be a ministry that can help remove life stress for someone. So, some of these things are maybe things that intuitively just come to mind. Well, I like to do X, and so I can therefore meet Y need. But you might also be thinking, oh, it's too big. I could never, help somebody whose need is that they need a wheelchair ramp built at their house. I get that. But, there are things that maybe you can do as an individual, but there may be some things that you need a group of people to come together to do within your church family. So we'll talk about what some of those differences are, where, you know, maybe you can lean in versus let's get a group together to lean in. Well, as I was, again, going through some of the responses to the question that we asked from some of our ministry friends who, you know, who have a lot of needs in their families, you know, what are some of the things that people have done? What are some of the needs that have been met that really did help reduce your caregiving stress? And they really kind of broke down into the categories that you see right there. Now, you know, we talk about mental health ministry all the time. I think it's really easy for people to think that mental health ministry is about fixing mental health. That's not the case at all. Mental health ministry is about meeting a need that you can meet. It has, I'm a person who tends to easily get depressed. You may never be able to fix that. I don't anticipate that that will be fixed this side of eternity. But I do know that there are things that I can do for myself that help that. And I know that there's things that, that can help me when I, get kind of in a funk, if you will. So these are the kinds of things that we'll be talking about that can really be that one thing that just helps lift something off of their burden. One thing that was mentioned over and over again in these communications that we got back from our friends was do not add to their burden. That is not going to be something that takes off a straw from that camel's back. It's going to be something that just adds another one. So, don't get in the way when you're trying to help, whatever the help is. So I want to just take a little break because I've just talked a lot here in a few minutes, and just want to reiterate that. There I am. Sorry. That if you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the chat on Facebook or in the chat here in the webinar, and I'll work them in as I'm able. Again, I'm going solo today because Beth had another obligation. So here are just, I just love the community that we serve, and they just have so many great ideas of ways that you can just take that one thing off of a caregiver or a person, who's struggling with their mental health in some way. Many families that have a child that has a disability, or there's a child that has a disability, have other typical kids. And, every child needs love and, to grow up in a thriving environment. So, how can you meet needs for not only the child who has disabilities, but perhaps for the other children? Some of the things that all kids need is transportation. They can't drive until they're 16, 17, 18 years old. Children have activities as they're, coming along. I mean, I think it's easy to think, all right, well, I can take somebody else's child with me to a sporting event or to sporting practices. That's all great examples. A lot of families need both before and after school care, particularly if parents have to work outside the home. That can be just a huge blessing, whether that's something that you do as an individual or something that you do in your school or in your church. Every kid going back to school, which will be on us here in just a few more weeks, every kid needs school supplies and back to school preparations, which can include things like, haircuts and shoe shopping, those kinds of things. Every kid, every typical kid for sure needs to learn life skills. Parents who have a lot of time invested in caring for one individual may not have as much bandwidth or opportunity to help the typical kids learn about following their own passions. Whether it's, learning how to fish or do woodworking or learning music, that kind of thing. Any of those things can be considered activities that can help remove a burden from a family. I encourage you to, if you know the family and they're comfortable with you babysitting for them, for their child with a disability, that's a great gift that you can give really anytime. Um, and, I've been talking so far about just the child that does not have disabilities, the typical child in their household, but the child with disabilities has gifts and talents too. And so to the extent that, you have gifts and interests that are similar to that child, help them to develop their passions as well. There were a lot of household items, things that kind of fell under the household needs category that were responses to the question that we asked some of our ministry friends. And I think some of them are, really easy to come up with. It's, like groceries and yard work. It can be very difficult to get out when you have a child who perhaps is in a wheelchair or has a lot of needs, or even just needs, is immunocompromised. A lot of the families that we serve have a loved one who is immunocompromised. So, going grocery shopping, or just picking up the phone and asking your friend what they need from the store because you're going and you're happy to pick it up. Sometimes people will show up to do things like yard work at a person's house, and that's wonderful. Or it could be cleaning. That's wonderful. But again, don't get in the way. Don't, bring your own tools, know what you're going to do, don't be a burden on them, don't add to their burden. One thing that I thought was a great idea that we have personally benefited from was a member of our community mentioned how helpful it is to go get prescription medication from the pharmacy and bring it to the family. Again, for families that have a lot of needs, particularly difficulty getting in and out or immunocompromised, being able to get the medication without, putting your loved one at greater risk can be a real helpful thing. And grocery stores and pharmacies will allow you to do that. We personally had that happen years ago when my husband had an accident and had surgery. And a friend volunteered to pick up prescription medication that he needed, which was hugely helpful. Let's see. The next bullet is employment. Parents who, parents have to work. Often, most of us live in households where both parents have a job or have to have a job. You can hire people. If you are an employer, you can hire people who can work from home. Make those opportunities if you have jobs that really don't have to be done in your office environment. And I think we've all learned over the last couple of years that is absolutely doable a lot more often than perhaps we thought before March of 2020. Providing transportation, carpooling, whatever you want to call it, for families who need to be able to have a transportation option where maybe, they struggle to have consistent transportation to and from their work. And then if you are an employer and you have positions where a person with disabilities would be a great employee, well, make those kinds of options available to families. People with disabilities often make tremendous employees. So, if it's in your power to do that sort of thing, absolutely, extend those opportunities to families who have children with disabilities. Now, holidays and special events, in households that have not only perhaps a child or an older person who has a lot of care needs, but also has younger children who have all of the typical kinds of needs as they're growing up. It can be very challenging for the parents to get out to go to holiday performances, special events, sporting events, that sort of thing. Just volunteer to babysit so that another family, so that the family can go enjoy those activities with their other children. Volunteer to be a buddy for the child, even if there's no official buddy ministry in your church, so that the other, parents and family members can go participate in worship, participate in ministry events without, having to constantly take care of the needs of a particular child. Cindy Farini often shares this wonderful example of a young man who saw that either she or Joe would not be in the service, because they were caring for their son Joey when he was much younger. And he volunteered to, come be with Joey in the nursery so that Joe and Cindy could go to worship together. And, she often tells that story about, what a great blessing that was for their family, to be able to, for her and Joe to be able to worship together and have that time really in some ways to focus on their marriage. That can be a very challenging thing for families that have disabilities and mental health needs. So let's see, any comments? I'm doing a quick check here. Hang on just a second. Thank you for watching. Again, if you have any comments or questions, please put them in the chat. I'm going to have to stop the share to grab some of the webinar comments, but we'll be done with the share here in just a second. Definitely add them. We will work them in as we are able to after I get through this little checklist that we're going through. Every family has emergencies. Nobody plans for an emergency. Nobody wants an emergency, but it is super helpful to have people that you can rely on, that you can call on if you have an emergency where, suddenly you have to go to the hospital because, your child, broke their arm or whatever. If you have had a child and you have a little one already at home, you probably had somebody on call for when it was going to be time for you to deliver, that baby that you were pregnant with. But, parents in particular that have a lot of special needs in their lives can really benefit from having somebody that they can just rely on. And then, if you know a family in your community, if you are a family that has a lot of needs and ends up in the hospital frequently, one thing that can really be helpful is either stay with the other children at home, or my goodness, go to the hospital and sit with the child who's there or the loved one who's there so that the parent can go home and get some rest and get a shower and get some decent food. And I know if you have been in a hospital recently, but hospital food is not getting any better. And, the hours that hospital, cafeterias are open actually is, they're not open quite as much or because of the pandemic. So, take the parents food or snacks or drinks in the hospital just so that they have an option to have something that is healthy or to have something at all that is available to them. Getting into soul care and spiritual care, this is really important. And I would just encourage you that, this is probably the most important thing that you can do. And it's the thing that really doesn't cost, anything other than your time maybe. And just, stepping into a new relationship, a new friendship. And this could be for parents who, have a child with a disability. It can be for, others who are providing care for that loved one. It doesn't just have to be parents, but, church is not just happening in the 4 square walls of that little building down the street. Church is wherever 2 or 3 are gathered. And so for many families, it's very difficult to get out of their home to come to not only Sunday morning services, but also, if they want to participate in small groups that meet throughout the week. Well, just have the group meet in their home if they're open to that. Bring the church to them. That is a hugely helpful opportunity for many families. Years and years ago, before my family was even thinking about disability ministry of any kind, my husband did this. when his men's group met in the home of a family whose the husband was actually uh, disabled and could not leave the home easily. Another option for just some soul care and some building friendship and relationship is to meet in that family's home. If they, if it's harder for them to go out, if it's hard for them to come to your home for dinner, or hard for you to meet them out, at a restaurant, I encourage you to just have dinner there if they're open to that. And then, bring dinner to them sometimes, or at least get there early to help them set up, and then stay a little later to help them clean up. Again, don't add to the burden. Some of what you may do in caring for the needs of the children may also really bless the parents in a very real and tangible way. Hang on just a quick second. Again, I'm operating by myself today. I'm trying to get over here and I can't get there. So I'll get to your comments and questions here in just a second. I'm so sorry about that. Lisa Jameson, who is writes for Key Ministry and has her own thriving ministry in Minnesota, Walk Right In Ministries, has talked about how people in her life, as her children were growing up and she needed to take care of her disabled daughter, people who would come be an adult presence with her other children, whether it's to help them with homework or to help them with music lessons or whatever, how that ministered to her as well. That was just, there's so much mom guilt, oh my goodness, about everything. And if you're like me, about everything, but just, to know that your child who you love so dearly, but you can't give as much attention to as you would like, that they are getting, some of the attention that you would love for them to have and that they deserve to have. Getting that from a caring friend in your own home is just an incredible blessing, an incredible spiritual blessing to be able to see that. Lisa also mentioned that people who you have a friendship with already, don't just do this if you don't really know the person, but that are social initiators, that they will just call you up and say, hey, can I come over? I've got, this, extra food that I made today. I'd love to just bring you some. I haven't seen you for a while. That kind of thing can really give a lift to somebody who has a hard time getting out of the home. Another ministry friend mentioned that, having friends, having somebody just write a quick note and drop it in the mail, or, just, calling to see if they can stop over for a visit, and having, another human friend just right there in the flesh can be so very helpful when your life is so isolated because of your caregiving needs. We often say, or I often say anyway, that nobody gets into the kind of ministry that we do, mental health type ministry, without a personal impact. And I can tell you, personally, a few years ago, we went through a hard time, and I really couldn't be a lot of help outside of meeting the needs of my own family. And I tell you, it was really painful to realize some of the people who knew what was going on in our family and either didn't think through the impact on me. These were people that were my friends, I thought. They either didn't think through the impact on me and my family, long term, and they didn't do anything. They didn't reach out in any way. And it hurt. Again, you don't need to be about fixing whatever the problem is, or, healing somebody's depression. You just need to step in and be a friend. And being a friend can provide tremendous spiritual care. Well, church, this is your rallying cry. This is really the heartbeat of the church, or it should be the heartbeat of the church, to lean into those messy places where, Jesus would lean into. Now, if you are familiar at all with the needs of families living with disabilities and mental health challenges, they're important and urgent. There's kind of a old saying that, nothing important is urgent and nothing urgent is important. But for these families, they have both going on at the same time. So, there's not going to be a right time or a wrong time necessarily to show that you care. Just like all of us need friends, people with a lot of caregiving responsibilities, for whatever the reason, they need true friends. They need that sure spiritual foundation that you only get, in relationship with Jesus and in a fellowship of believers, whatever that looks like. They need opportunities to share their gifts. Just because somebody is primarily isolated at home because they have caregiving responsibilities, or because they have agoraphobia and they don't like to leave the home, it doesn't mean that they have no gifts. It absolutely means that there needs to be opportunity for them to share their gifts. And church, how can that happen? And most of all, people need relationship with Jesus. It's absolutely the truth. So there's a lot of things that I've mentioned today that an individual can do. But there are things that definitely takes more than one person to be able to do. So I'm going to stop the share so that I can see some of the comments that are popping up here. Let's see. Because I know there are a few. So a great question has come up in the webinar chat. How do you communicate your needs to people? I think it's common for caregivers to feel isolated, unfortunately. I think that is a great point. And, one thing that I've heard over and over again, and I think if you ask anybody who's got a lot of caring responsibilities, that they are probably not going to be asking for help. Oftentimes it's because they're too busy. It's head down 24/7 to do what it is that they need to do. So I would just encourage you, if you are not that person, but you have a friend who is, lean into that relationship. And then, if you lean into that relationship, you're going to see what those needs are. And then just, ask. Everybody needs groceries. Everybody needs household cleaning kinds of supplies and toiletries. Everybody needs to have, a caring friend. So, those kinds of things anybody can do. If you are that person, per this comment, then, there's don't be afraid of reaching out to your prayer team at your church and just telling them, what you're going through, because there may be some opportunities there that you didn't necessarily know. And find somebody that you can trust to share, what the needs are that you have. So this is a both and kind of thing as well. If you've got a friend who's got a lot of caregiving needs for whatever reason, or struggles with mental health challenges for whatever reason, lean into that friendship. But then as you are being, ministered to by that friend, don't be afraid to trust them, to let them know, some of the things that you need as well. We've got another couple of things here. Thank you. Somebody said, great ideas to help families and individuals with mental health and disabilities. The needs section is very specific and practical. I've got some more that I'm going to go through here, but I definitely wanted to get to your comments. Somebody else mentioned that they found Zoom has created opportunities for those who can't or don't want to leave their homes, and they can be equipped to be leaders. What resources do you suggest for this kind of training? I am pretty sure that Tom and Julie Meekins, who are on a lot of our discussions, and Julie, if you're here, I don't know if you are, but we just really appreciate what they do. I'm pretty sure that they've put together like a little Zoom training kind of thing, but I'll reach out and can put that in the comments on this video when we post it in our YouTube and Vimeo channels. Oh, hey, Tom and Julie, they said yes. Am I telling a true statement? Do you have some sort of Zoom training for folks? Just, send me your answer if you will. But, I would just encourage them, perhaps if they're participating in Zoom things, let them, we can always put something together. Okay, so somebody else, sorry about that. It's somebody else that has done that. But yeah, I mean, once you're ministered to, then, you are deputized to minister to others as well. I mean, that's just kind of, a principle. We are not only to be served, but we are called to serve. That, at the end of our lives, we all want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant, not well done, good and faithful recipient of service. So I will find the answer to your question, and then I will post it in the show notes for the Vimeo and YouTube videos of this. So on that last slide where talked about, where the church can be the church, bear with me a second. There are a lot of things that can be done. And again, people may not be asking, and I so appreciated that comment that was shared, how do you ask? People may not be asking. So you really do have to lean into a relationship, use your own life experience. If you are somebody who has been there, then you are equipped, whether you realize it or not, to be able to lean into that kind of relationship, with somebody else who's coming behind you. Cindy Farini, again, gave this great example that there's a family in their area that has a child with significant disabilities. Joe and Cindy's son now is 40 years old, and, their life is very different from all the hands-on challenges that come with really little kids with disabilities. But Cindy is basically available and on call for this family because she knows exactly what the kinds of things are that they're going through. And so, if you have been where another family is, just make yourself available. That can be an incredible gift. If you are a person who has a yearning to serve in ministry in some way, but you don't know what to do, a great place to start is always just to jump in where you see God working. Whether that is with special needs ministry at your church, or, serving a family that you've gotten to be friends with, and you never know what God will do with where you say yes. I mean, a lot of the people who are in disability ministry, mental health ministry, they just started with saying yes to meeting a need. And then along the way, it, became something that became a vocation for them, or, a profession often. So you just never know what will come from just saying yes that one time. Now, you may think, okay, I know this family that has significant disabilities, and the family can't get out of the house because they need a wheelchair ramp. But, I don't know how to build a wheelchair ramp, and it's too expensive for me. But, I bet that there's some guys in your church who like to build things. And I bet that you have a benevolent fund at your church where maybe you could buy some materials. And I bet some of those guys that like to build things, and I don't want to exclude the girls too, but, some of the folks who like to build things, I bet maybe some of them have the skills that you need. So it's just, again, thinking outside of that box, how can you meet the needs? It doesn't mean that, again, you have to be a person who's going to build a house for a person who has disabilities, but maybe you can group a couple of people together who have some skills to be able to take off that burden, that one thing that's really hard for that family, to give them that mental space so that, they can, they don't sink into despair in the midst of all the things that there are challenges for them. And I would encourage you to, don't only think about, something that's functional, if that, in that kind of scenario where you're maybe the need is to build a wheelchair ramp, but also think about the form, the beauty, because beauty speaks to people. There may be people who are artists and interior designers in your church who may really have tremendous gifts in developing sensory friendly kinds of spaces for your special needs classes in your church that are visually appealing and appealing to all of the senses in ways that goodness, somebody like me would not be able to do, but other people have those skills already in your church. We've mentioned that typical kids have plenty of needs, just like, the children that, are being cared for with disabilities. Kids that don't have, specific disabilities still need tutors at times. So if you're a teacher or you are, good at a particular subject, volunteer to tutor a family's typical child who needs a little extra help, or volunteer to provide some skills that the parent might lack, because none of us has, all of the skills that we need. I'm fun fact about me, not that you asked, but I love to do sewing and needlework. And I've done that kind of thing since I was a little kid. And when I was a teenager, this was not a skill that my parents had, but, I had a family friend who was very skilled at sewing, and I remember her helping me with the sewing project. So, I mean, that was a great example right there. It wasn't a disability issue, but it was just think about how you can lean into the friendship and come alongside the family and provide some skills that you have. And then, I mentioned the car thing a little while ago. There's probably guys or girls in your church who like to fix cars or know how to fix cars. Transportation is a huge big deal for pretty much everybody, because unless you live in a city where there's really great public transportation, you're going to need to have some way to get to medical appointments and to get kids to activities and get groceries and get to your church. And so, if you're somebody who likes to repair cars, well, offer that up as a blessing, a financial blessing to families who may be tight on finances. In my church years ago, there was a family that had a need for a car. There were guys who knew how to fix cars, and there was somebody who had a car they wanted to donate somewhere. And so all those things came together to bless that one family. And it turned into a ministry that over the next couple of years gave away, like, I don't know, a dozen cars to people in our community. What a witness to the world, and what a lifting of a burden from a family, to prevented a lot of things that could come downstream of not having transportation to and from work, to and from school for their kids. If you are somebody who's a sports coach, work with kids who have disabilities. Just because a child has disabilities doesn't mean that they don't have interest or skills in sports. Now, in some cases it does, absolutely. But in many cases it doesn't. So, Tony DeRazio of Jacob's Ladder Fitness has done a great job with this. I can just imagine how gratifying it is to see, a child who has disabilities be able to participate in something like that, to be taking good care of themselves, and, to have that kind of healthy outlet. I can go on and on, but I'm not going to belabor this. But, if you are somebody who has event planning skills, there's always needs to organize events and to help families that have a lot of competing things, competing demands going on, to help, with organization of things, in their lives. If you have that kind of relationship, there is an enormous need for people who are attorneys and bankers to help families do the financial research and the long-term planning that's needed for particularly for people who are disabled and will never be able to care for themselves. Provide your time, volunteer to file legal paperwork for families, around guardianship or whatever it is that, that they need to do. Is that, I absolutely consider that mental health ministry. because it's lifting a burden from somebody that, they can't possibly, lift on their own in most cases. And speaking of financial kinds of things, I do not have an answer for this. I do not have great ideas for this, but I know because of, just living life and seeing, financial management is a huge issue for many people. And particularly people that, may have, they support themselves, but they either a loved one has disabilities or they have mental health challenges, and that impacts their ability to be able to manage their personal finances in a productive way. I don't have a good answer for this because it's obviously a very sensitive thing. But if you have ideas, I'd love to hear them. We're all about collaboration at Key Ministry. So I'd love to hear that. Definitely reach out to me if that's something that you have something to share. So now all of this may not have sounded like mental health, lifting a burden. It doesn't look like a thing that's necessarily on a checklist on a church website, but every single one of these things that our ministry friends responded to and provided, and every single thing that I just mentioned to you can absolutely help somebody, remove some mental clutter so that they can focus on things that really they need to be focusing on, and help them see that, that Jesus cares about their needs. It's an opportunity for the church to be the church. It's an opportunity for you, watcher, viewer, to do something. No individual is going to be able to do everything. No church is going to be able to do everything, but every church and every individual can do something. So we've got about 15 more minutes till the top of the hour. If you've got any comments or questions, I'd love to, to work those in with the time that we have remaining. And I'm happy to also, have conversation with you outside of this, if this is something that you would be interested in talking in more detail about. Got a question here. Thoughts regarding youth mental health first aid or adult mental health first aid courses being provided to a church community? Fabulous idea. And lots of churches already do that sort of thing. I would encourage that greatly. In most communities in the US, at least, there are mental health boards that have people, who are on staff who are paid to come provide that kind of teaching to community groups. So it doesn't have to be a secular group. It absolutely can be churches. So I would very much encourage that. There's a lot of preschools now that have trauma-informed training for their preschool teachers so that they can recognize what they're seeing. We talk often about how behavior is communication. So it can be very helpful to recognize, wherever you, wherever you're serving in church to really understand the behavior that you may be seeing. This commenter also said that, she's a youth mental health first aid trainer and offer a hybrid training for our church and our greater community. That's fantastic. Yeah, we really encourage churches to do that sort of thing. Mental health ministry is absolutely about providing space for things like Grace Alliance, Mental Health Grace Alliance, Fresh Hope groups, Alcoholics Anonymous groups, bipolar and depression support groups, NAMI groups that meet on mental health needs. But it's not just about providing space, but it's about, leaning in to relationship and friendship with people so that they can have a place where they can, in a person, where they can deal with really what's often the hardest things in their lives. So anything else? I really do appreciate all of you who have joined, both who are watching online and also who have joined the webinar today, and great comments. Well, I am going to put my email address in the webinar chat real quick. It's Catherine@keyministry.org. And I'll put that in the show notes as well. definitely reach out to me if if you're like me. I think of things like, after I shut off the Zoom here and say, oh, I wish I'd asked that. So don't hesitate to reach out and ask any other questions, or give other examples of, what you've seen be really good and helpful for individuals and families who are either struggling with mental health issues, or just, are caregiver for someone struggling with any kind of issue, that are great ideas for relieving people's burdens. So, all right. Well, it's about 10 till, so I'm just going to go ahead and sign off. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Visit keyministry.org for more resources like this. We provide free consultations to churches and ministries, and folks who are interested in what mental health ministry might look like in their church. So definitely reach out to us and see what other events we have coming up next on our events page. Thanks so much.